Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue. I'm gonna drink till da-da-da-da.
Hi and welcome to the video, and it's time for a chili ale. Chili ales are becoming increasingly more popular these days, and I'm particularly a fan. Here's my recipe for what I call a sweet chili ale. Tastes of course do vary, and if you would like something that isn't sweet, then I would suggest using a different yeast. The one I have here has a middle attenuation rate, and you might also want to reduce the main mash temperature down to maybe something like 65. The other thing to do would be to remove the candy sugar and replace it either with normal table sugar, thus giving you a drier beer, or consider not using sugar at all and just adjust it in grain. You can also play around with the IBU. This has a very low IBU. Now before we get into the main brew, I want to discuss something that's very important, and that is grain crush. I've noticed on the Grainfather users forum on Facebook that some people are still saying they only get 65% efficiency, even when they're doing everything else correct. I would say that the reason for that is insufficient grain crush. What you see here is a good example of my grain crush. Yes, it's actually milled quite fine, as opposed to coarse. And this is really the secret to getting the better efficiencies with the Grainfather. If you're having your grain milled by somebody else, then always insist in a fine crush. This will give you the better efficiencies. When you collect your next grain from your local homebrew store, give it a look at before you actually walk out the store. If it looks like it's not fine enough, then just ask them to put it through the mill again. Believe me, it will make a big difference. So now let's dough in. And like I always say, it's very important that you do this gradually. Get yourself some sort of tool like the one I use to gradually put the grain in, and make sure that every time you add the grain, you then give it a nice stir up. The more grain you have in, the more of a stir you need to give. So this is the point here where I have all of my grain in, and I'm really looking to stir it from the bottom, the middle, and also the top at various different points. And this is something that really is essential. You want to make sure you don't have any dough balls whatsoever. Once you've put the mash plate and everything in there, I also recommend that you put a sink strainer on top, as you can see I've used here. This will stop any loose pieces of grain entering into your wort while you're recirculating. So onto the mash schedule now, and this is a pretty simple one. So you're going to mash in at 67 degrees C or 150 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes, and then mash out at 75 degrees C or 167 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see here from the look of the wort that this is definitely a darker style of beer, and you'll also observe that the handy sink strainer has collected some grain already. Very nice. This brings me to my second side topic for this video. If you want to see benefits from adjusting your pH in your water, then it's very important that you test the pH at the correct time. The correct time is actually when you're about 10 minutes into your mash. In a perfect world you'd be looking for 5.2, but anywhere between 5 and 6, as far as I'm concerned, is plenty good enough. So now that we've got the mash on, let's prepare the additions for the brew, and the first thing that I'm going to look at is the chilies. The first thing to point out is that, same with anything like this, vegetables, fruit, the most important thing to do after you've bought them is to actually put them straight in the freezer. The reason this is important is if there's anything actually within here that is quite nasty, then the freeze will kill it. The other thing is, and this applies to fruit more than anything, is all of the enzymes in the fruit will then be broken down, which is resulting in a perfect state for fermentation. These are 3 of the 6 chilies that I'm going to use for this brew. I took these 3 chilies out of the freezer last night, the evening before the brew, so that they could thaw out before the brew day. So the first thing to do is to remove the stalks, and then simply cut them in half. They are now ready to be added into your boil at the appropriate time. Some people feel that adding the chilies during the boil actually gives a taste they don't like. Personally, I like it, so in they go. The next item for preparation is my candy sugar, and as you can see here, I'm using a rubber hammer and giving it a good smash up. This will actually help it dissolve in the boil and the last thing you want is big lumps of sugar sticking to the bottom of your Grainfather. Not good. I like to arrange all of my boil additions in time order and keep everything nice and organised, and I'd recommend it to you that you do the same. An organised brew day is a much better brew day. Okay, so it's now time to start the sparge, and as always I'm going to say you must do this slowly and evenly. You want to get really complete coverage of all of that grain so that you can wash those sugars away. This is another thing that's very, very important for your efficiency. Okay, so it's now the start of the boil and we have the hot break, so I'm just going to stir all of this back into the wort. As we know, this is just protein, but we need to clear it before we add our first hop addition. So it's now pretty clear, so we can add our first hop addition. Of course, we're now going to stir this in as well and catch the last bit of that protein on top. I have to say that I'm really happy that the guys at iMake actually put in the feature where I can start my boil at 99 degrees C, because for me, at my sea level, that's boiling. So now it's time to add the Irish moss, and also in go the chilies, and give them a really nice stir up now. It feels pretty cool to have something a little bit different in my kettle at the moment. So now it's time for the candy sugar. My method is to add some of the hot wool to the candy sugar and give it a stir up, just so that it's pre-melted before it hits the kettle. It won't melt all the way down, of course, but it will have a start, and that's very important. I usually start preparing the candy sugar in this way a minute before I'm actually due to add it, so that by the time I've actually done everything, in it goes at the right time. The thing to do now is to give it a really good stir and pay particular attention to the bottom. Obviously watch out for that filter, you don't want to be knocking that. That's why it's a good idea when you pour it in, to pour it in more of a central or a further away position to the actual filter. To start with, you'll notice that there are still pieces of sugar at the bottom. Move those around, we don't want them sticking on the bottom of the Grainfather. That's going to be horrible to clean up, and you know, it's going to give the sugar a bit of a burnt effect, and we don't really want that. So now it's time for the 5-minute addition, and some people question this. They would say, well, you know, why do you need a 5-minute addition when the primary flavour in this beer is chili? Well, the answer is quite simple. I don't want just the taste of chili, I want this to be a nice rounded beer, and the hops and the last minute addition, that they will give me that, and they will also give me a nice complement to the aroma. So now the boil is over and I've chilled my wort down. You can see this on the Blickman through meter here. It's important to realise when you're chilling down on the Grainfather that the main temperature you see on the unit is for the wort inside the kettle still. What we're interested in is the temperature of the wort actually in the counterflow chiller. To make the modification to your Grainfather by adding a Blickman through meter is really simple. First and foremost, you'll see they sell it in two versions. You need the 3/8 of an inch version. This will fit perfectly to your wort out hose. I then suggest that you buy an extra length of silicone hosing that can fit on the other side of this, and then you can actually use it to splash your wort into your fermenter. What I do is I actually leave the Blickman through meter on at all times. This is actually in direct contradiction to what the manufacturer recommends, and I've had a number of people now point this out to me. When I first bought this, I actually checked the accuracy of the temperature, and I was surprised that it was actually spot on. The main construction of this is stainless steel, and then the thing that actually reads the temperature is just simply an aquarium temperature sticker. You'll also notice that homebrew stores sell these also for fermentation buckets. I've been using this Blickman through meter now on my Grainfather for almost a year, and I brew pretty much every 2 weeks, and so far it's still incredibly accurate. If it ever loses its accuracy, then I'll pay the 1 penny charge and get a new sticker for it. I don't see that it's really a big issue. So here we go now, splashing the wort into the fermenter, and you can see that it's adding a nice amount of oxygen there. The way that I do this is using that extra length of silicone hosing that I have it connected up to a hook on the ceiling. I've got a makeshift bracket that holds the pipe, and this works incredibly well. Very, very simple modification, very, very effective. Once I've got about half of my wort in the bucket, I then start adding the yeast, and I don't stop the pump or anything like that. What I do is I just simply sprinkle it on top, as you can see here. What I do once it's all in is I then start moving the bucket around to actually splash directly onto the yeast. This is basically a way of rehydrating it with the actual wort. And I find this is incredibly effective. I never wait for more than a couple of hours for fermentation to start being active. So yeah, as we like to say in England, the proof is in the pudding. Despite being a proud British guy, I do sometimes wonder about some of our expressions. Okay, so I think you get the general idea now about how I do this. I don't think I need to show you me doing the whole thing. But yeah, it all gets covered, and it works very, very well. So here's what the resulting wort looks like, and I'm happy to say that I hit my targets very nicely. So what will happen next is a week before I'm actually due to finish this and put it into bottles, I'm going to take the rest of my chilies out of the freezer, and I'm going to prepare them as I did earlier. I will then take a perfectly clean and sanitary mason jar, such as this one, and I will add an alcohol spirit of my choice. A lot of people would use vodka because of the fact that it doesn't add any extra flavour. Personally, I like to do different things. So what I will do is I will either add rum or cognac, probably cognac on this one, I quite fancy that. The jar will get filled almost to the top with the spirit, and then I will add the chilies into this. After it's been in this jar in the fridge for about 3 days, I will then add it during the last 4 days of the fermentation before bottling. My personal preference is to add both the chilies and the alcohol, but some people just add the alcohol with the chili infused into it. Again, down to personal choice. The thing to remember here is that the alcohol that you're adding is not exactly a huge amount. So really what it's going to do is just give an extra background flavour, and personally I find that to be rather nice. I've experimented with all sorts of stouts, for example, with different types of alcohol in them. Always goes down very nicely. Apologies if you found this video to be a bit too long. I generally like to keep my videos under 10 minutes, but there was a lot to cover here, so I hope you enjoyed it. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!
Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue. I'm gonna drink
Hi and welcome to the video, and it's time for a chili ale. Chili ales are becoming increasingly more popular these days, and I'm particularly a fan. Here's my recipe for what I call a sweet chili ale. Tastes of course do vary, and if you would like something that isn't sweet, then I would suggest using a different yeast. The one I have here has a middle attenuation rate. And you might also want to reduce the main mash temperature down to maybe something like 65. The other thing to do would be to remove the candy sugar and replace it either with normal table sugar, thus giving you a drier beer, or consider not using sugar at all and just adjust it in grain. You can also play around with the IBU. This has a very low IBU. Now before we get into the main brew, I want to discuss something that's very important, and that is grain crush. I've noticed on the Grainfather users forum on Facebook that some people are still saying they only get 65% efficiency, even when they're doing everything else correct.